Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Well, as I'm approaching my 170th cruise, I reflect back on cruising of the past, shall we say, and it's almost funny what used to be accepted and expected on a cruise ship you can't even think about doing anymore. So let's talk about let's say 10 things that, yeah, you just can't do on a cruise anymore. So the things we're going to talk about are things on cruise lines that used to be just perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable. It was the way things were. And now, yeah, it's very hard to either do them or do them at all. And let's start talking with a simple one that everyone should know out there: smoking. Obviously, smoking on cruise ships nowadays, you can smoke in the casinos, some casinos. You can smoke in designated smoking areas or a cigar lounge maybe, and that's normally it. You cannot smoke in the dining hall. You cannot smoke in the theaters. You cannot smoke or walking around the pool deck. You cannot smoke or vape or anything like that anywhere else on the cruise ships. However, back in the day, cruise ship smoking used to be just part of cruising. You could smoke in your cabin, you could smoke in the theater, you could smoke in the nightclubs, you can smoke everywhere on the ship. Try and do that now, and sometimes it'll even get you kicked off the cruise ship. Can't do smoking anymore. Another thing cruise lines can't do anymore is cruise to nowhere. Remember how when Canada didn't open up during the pandemic, yet United States was and Alaska was, and they were having a hard time? They had to get special legislation for the Passenger Vessel Act there that means that they don't have to stop in Canada or a foreign country on the way to Alaska in order to do those cruises. Well, back in 2016, the US government really started cracking down on this, and that's one of the reasons that happened back in 2021 when the cruise lines started opening up again. But yeah, that used to actually be commonplace. Cruises just used to say, hey, we're going to do a 4-day sailing, we're going to sail out to sea, and then we're going to come back. And they just can't do that anymore unless they get special permission on a case-by-case basis. Like, we couldn't stop in that port because there was a hurricane. Something like that. Otherwise, they're not doing it. Now, on cruise ships, we all know that there is, some cruise ships have these big, huge mini putts, big, elaborate things for the kids to play. On some cruise ships, there's a driving range. Either it's a screen indoors or they have a screen with a netted area around. Well, that's pretty complicated compared to the way it used to be. You used to just get up on top deck over on the edge of the ship and just start driving your golf balls directly into the ocean. And no, they weren't biodegradable, they weren't fish food, they were just regular golf balls driving off the side of the ship into the water. I don't think anywhere is allowing you to do that too often anymore. Speaking of something you're not allowed to do anymore, if you thought maybe hitting a golf ball off the side of the ship wasn't very good for safety or the environment, how about taking a gun and shooting it off the side of the ship? That's right, skeet shooting used to be something you could do on almost every luxury cruise line out there. That used to be just an activity. They've obviously done away with that. One of the reasons they've done away with that is you're not allowed ammo on cruise ships. You're not allowed live guns on ships in certain areas of the world. You cannot bring weapons. They actually search the ship and look for them and confiscate them and things like that. So yeah, it made it very hard nowadays with the new rules and security reasons and things like that to continue skeet shooting off the side of a ship. Yeah, drinking and guns on the cruise ship, probably not a good mixture. Have you ever watched old episodes of The Love Boat and you would see all the people coming on board and meeting the crew and everything, and then all of a sudden you'd hear over the intercom in the background, all ashore that's going ashore, and then people would start to leave the cruise ship as it got ready to sail. That's because before, you used to be able to allow passengers, families used to be allowed to get on the cruise ship with you, give your hugs and kisses goodbye, and then get off the ship. can't do that anymore. While you can get permission to have a guest on board for, while you're in port, the paperwork and the things the hoops and things you have to jump through are spectacular. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot of special arranging. But that used to just be common practice. You used to just get on the ship and then just leave. That's just not the way things are anymore. But wow, can you imagine them trying that on the ships that we have these days? Imagine guests being allowed on board a ship that holds 6,500 passengers, and they each bring 2 guests to say goodbye. The ship would just sink right there in the water. So yeah, you can't do that anymore neither. While crew members on board are very talented, the singers, the dancers, the entertainers, they're all very talented. One thing cruise lines used to do all the time was have passenger talent shows. Now, we all know there's karaoke on board. Cruise lines like Princess Cruise Lines has the Voice of the Ocean, and by the time you get to the finale in Voice of the Ocean, they're all really good singers, but it's all singing. Back then, it used to be anything goes. You could go up and do a magic act. You could do a tap dancing act. You could do a comedy act. You could go up with a puppet and do ventriloquism. You can do almost anything you wanted in the talent show. There was no testing to see what the material was going to be. So some people would get up and just bomb completely, and people would just, but you know what? It was all in good fun, and people had a really good time. But yeah, they kind of inched that out and now have more professional type entertainment. And if you are involved as a passenger, you are either in the karaoke or you're being tested to see how good a performer you actually are before you get up on stage. And yeah, there's not too many amateur ventriloquisms going up in the Voice of the Ocean anymore. One thing I kind of miss, we have the grand celebration. I was just on the Icon of the Seas. It was its inaugural sailing, the first sailing ever, and it was a big party on board, and off in the distance we had a little bit of fireworks going, but it was daylight. It was, yeah, okay, great. Back in the day when a ship used to leave port for an inaugural sailing or a big celebration, it used to be a big thing. They would have bands playing. The mayors would come out, the representatives would come out, politicians, and you would see all these thousands of streamers being thrown from the cruise ship as it left. It was this big gala celebration. Now, I know the streamers are probably not very environmentally friendly and everything, but I'm sure nowadays we could probably come up with something that is biodegradable and is, friendly, that they could get away with doing something like that again. I kind of miss the big celebrations that you used to see, and it would be great to see something like that again. Can you imagine like the Icon of the Seas with all the streamers coming off the side? It would have been absolutely spectacular. But yeah, they've done away with that. They've done away with streamers being thrown on the cruise ships. They've done away with the big celebrations like that. It's more tranquil and subdued, shall we say. Subdued. Speaking of subdued, have you ever tried to get food from the buffet at midnight on a cruise ship these days? If you are lucky enough to have any kind of a buffet at midnight, it is a very limited choice, shall we say. You might have like a hamburger and maybe some chicken strips, French fries, a couple pastries. It's not the grand buffet you'll see at lunchtime or dinner time or anything like that. It's nothing to write home about. However, back in the day when I was a young pup, they used to have things like the midnight buffet. And it was an event on board. The chefs would go all out for these, including ice sculptures and fruit sculptures and big displays and all kinds of freshly made buffet food of a wide assortment. And yes, the passengers were a lot less back then than they would have to handle that kind of thing these days. But I kind of miss. That was near the early days of my cruising experience. But I'm one of those people who like to eat late at night after all the entertainment is done. And I really kind of miss those big, spectacular midnight buffets because they're pretty much non-existent these days. Now, one cruise line in particular, Virgin Cruise Line, is sort of bringing something back that you don't see anymore. They have an adult-only area. The whole area is adult-only cruising, right? On that cruise ship, there's no one under 18, but they have a designated area on board where topless sunbathing is permitted. Now, apart from, say, Costa Cruise Lines on a couple of their ships and some private smaller cruise lines, that's just not allowed anymore, even though European audiences are much more liberal when it comes to this. There's much more topless sunbathing in, European beaches in Greece and France and Bulgaria and Ukraine than there are in North America. But the cruise lines tend to have a lot of North American audiences and passengers, so they kind of frown upon that, and there's much more family-friendly cruise lines, right, like Carnival, Royal Caribbean, etc., where that would be very highly controversial. So you do not see topless sunbathing anymore, but guess what? That used to be really just commonplace, especially on cruises, transatlantics, and sailings through Europe, because it just seemed to be part of the culture there. When North America kind of took over, they kind of put that aside. So yeah, that's something it's very rare, if not impossible, to do on most cruise lines these days. Now, one of the biggest TV shows ever for cruising that brought cruising into the mainstream audiences, of course, was The Love Boat. Princess Cruises' Love Boat, with Gavin MacLeod as Captain Steubing and the whole crew, Julie, Isaac, Doc, Gopher. These were the people who came into our homes once a week, and they showed us the high seas. And one of the things that you would notice is, because it was called The Love Boat, you would often see the crew interacting with guests on board and dating and hooking up and falling in love with passengers on board. You can't do that anymore. You cannot frolic and do shore excursions with crew members. You can't go to dinner with crew members, right? You can't fraternize with crew members. You can't invite crew members back to your cabin. This doesn't happen anymore, and if it does happen, the crew member themselves can actually be fired these days because of some things that have happened in the past that the cruise lines don't want to deal with anymore, right? Because hurt feelings and things going wrong is just part of relationships. And the cruise lines don't need to mediate between angry passengers and crew members who thought they were in love with each other and aren't anymore. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So the crew, you used to be able to flirt, used to be able to invite a dancer to dinner with you. You used to be able to go on shore excursion with friends and crew members that you struck up conversations with and say, hey, you know what? I'm going whale watching tomorrow. Why don't you come along? And they would. And yeah, that's something you cannot do anymore. And in fact, the cruise lines have such hard rules about it these days that it could actually get crew members fired. Well, that's it. That's 10 things that you used to be able to do. It used to be commonplace. And now you would have a real hard time finding it, seeing it, doing it, or even remembering it. Some of those things are so far back. Can you think of anything else you used to be able to do on a cruise ship that you can't do now? Leave some comments down below. Tell me what maybe you would have added to the list. And yeah. Until next time, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel blogs from around the world? Hit that subscribe button. Until next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.